In Pakistan, nearly 2 out of 3 marriages are between cousins. In Saudi Arabia, more than half. Generation after generation, this one tradition has fueled over 1,000 catalogued genetic disorders, and the damage is compounding. Now, governments across the Islamic world are panicking over a crisis they shielded through decades of silence. The question is whether reform can still outrun what's already been written into the DNA of millions. Across Pakistan, nearly 2/3 of all marriages are between relatives, most often first cousins. This is not an isolated phenomenon. In Saudi Arabia, the rate stands at 56%, and in the Gulf states, figures regularly exceed 40%, with some surveys in the United Arab Emirates and Kuwait recording rates as high as 54 or even 65%. These numbers have barely shifted over the past 2 decades, even as cities expand and education rises. The persistence is striking. Modernization has failed to break the hold of kinship marriage, embedding the practice deep within the social fabric. The impact is not confined to the Middle East. In the United Kingdom, children of Pakistani heritage account for only about 3.4% of all births, yet they represent nearly 30% of all diagnosed recessive genetic disorders nationwide. In Bradford, where the tradition is especially strong, whole generations of families have faced the consequences, children born with rare, life-altering conditions, parents navigating a health system stretched by the scale of the problem. The numbers reveal a structural crisis. This is not a fringe or declining custom, but a force shaping the health and future of millions. The burden falls most heavily on the youngest, whose lives are determined not by chance, but by the choices and pressures of the generations before them. The roots of cousin marriage stretch back to the earliest days of tribal society, when alliances between close kin helped keep land, livestock, and honor within the extended family. For generations, this system offered a kind of insurance. Blood ties meant trust, and trust meant stability. When Islam emerged, it drew a firm line against unions with parents or siblings, but left cousin marriage untouched. The Quran's silence was not accidental. Marrying a cousin was already a familiar solution, and early Muslim leaders often did the same, reinforcing the idea that such unions were not just allowed, but woven into the social order. Economic logic has kept the tradition alive. Inheritance passes more easily when families remain tightly knit. A cousin marriage can mean that land or property stays in the clan, avoiding the risk of outside claims. The bride price, or mahr, is often lower when both families are already close, easing the financial burden on young couples. For many, this is not just about culture, it's about survival in a world where outsiders cannot always be trusted. In the Gulf and in South Asian communities, these marriages also become a tool for migration. Cousin unions can provide a legal path for family reunification, especially for diaspora families seeking to bring relatives into Europe or the UK. Even in new countries, the pattern persists, handed down by parents and reinforced by the expectation that loyalty to kin comes before all else. The practice is not simply habit, it is a rational response to the pressures of inheritance, migration, and family solidarity, carried forward by the weight of tradition and the quiet force of expectation. First cousins share about 12.5% of their DNA, enough for hidden genetic risks to move from theory to reality. In the general population, the chance that a child will be born with a major congenital anomaly sits at roughly 2 to 3%. When both parents are first cousins, that risk rises to about 4 to 6%. This is not a guarantee of harm, but it is a doubling of the odds. The reason lies in recessive disease. Most people carry a handful of rare, silent mutations. When unrelated people have children, the odds of both carrying the same mutation are low. But cousins, inheriting DNA from the same grandparents, are more likely to share these silent risks. If both parents pass on the same hidden gene, the result can be a serious disorder that would almost never appear in the wider population. The story does not stop with a single marriage. In families and communities where cousin marriage is repeated over generations, the inbreeding coefficient rises. Each generation compounds the pool of rare mutations, concentrating risk and making even the rarest disorders more common. In Saudi Arabia, clinical data now record a burden of over 1,000 catalogued recessive disorders, many seen almost nowhere else. The science of genetics turns a familiar marriage pattern into a biological multiplier, with the consequences measured in hospital wards, special schools, and lifelong care. For families, these numbers are not abstract. They shape the fate of children, the strain on parents, and the future of entire communities. Inside a modest home in Bradford, the Akar family navigates a world shaped by diagnosis. 3 of the Akar children were born with mucolipidosis type 4, a rare lysosomal storage disorder that leaves them with profound developmental delays and a lifetime of medical care. The parents, both first cousins, carry the same silent mutation, an inheritance passed down not by fate, but by the logic of kinship marriage repeated through generations. Hospital visits become routine. Feeding tubes, wheelchairs, and specialist appointments are woven into daily life. The family's living room doubles as a treatment space, and every new symptom brings a fresh wave of anxiety. For the Akar siblings who remain healthy, childhood is marked by more than the usual worries. They watch their brothers and sisters endure invasive procedures and long stretches in intensive care. Guilt and fear settle early, as these children wonder if they too carry a hidden risk, or if they will someday be asked to care for their disabled siblings. The emotional weight is constant, responsibility pressed onto young shoulders, shaping ambitions and relationships before adulthood even begins. Asmat's story, also in Bradford, follows a similar path. Diagnosed with propionic acidemia at just 17 months, Asmat faced metabolic crises that could only be managed with a liver transplant. The surgery brought a measure of stability, but did not erase the need for lifelong medication and regular monitoring. For both families, the British health system offers advanced care, yet cannot undo the basic arithmetic of genetics. The diagnosis becomes the organizing force in the household, dictating routines, dividing attention, and forcing every family member to adapt. The burden is not theoretical. It is measured in sleepless nights, missed milestones, and the quiet, ongoing grief that comes from knowing this was preventable. Attempts to address the risks of cousin marriage in Britain often stall before they begin. In December 2024, a private member's bill sought to prohibit first cousin unions on public health grounds. The proposal drew on hard evidence, rates of rare genetic disorders among British Pakistani children, the heavy cost to families, and the NHS. Yet the bill failed to pass. Opponents warned of cultural overreach and the spectre of eugenics, arguing that targeting a single community would fuel division and suspicion. The debate grew heated, with some politicians and activists insisting that even discussing the risks amounted to racism or Islamophobia. Inside the National Health Service, efforts to communicate genetic risks have faced similar resistance. Leaflets and outreach campaigns are scrutinized for bias. Some health workers hesitate to raise the issue, fearing backlash or accusations of singling out a minority. Community leaders sometimes close ranks, warning that open criticism betrays family loyalty or invites public shame. In this climate, silence becomes the safer path, for officials, for doctors, even for families who know the risks firsthand. The result is a bottleneck where urgent warnings are blunted by politics, social pressure, and the fear of being seen as disloyal or discriminatory. Mandatory premarital screening programs now operate across the Gulf states, with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates requiring couples to undergo genetic testing before marriage. These programs are designed to identify high-risk matches, especially for hemoglobinopathies like sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia. In Saudi Arabia, screening flags around 90% of at-risk couples, yet most still choose to proceed with the marriage. The law provides information, but rarely changes decisions grounded in family loyalty and social expectation. In Qatar, screening has been in place since 2009, but the cousin marriage rate has actually climbed by about 30% over a generation, now standing at 54%. The limits of these policies are clear. Screening can inform, but it cannot override the deep logic of kinship and inheritance that drives these unions. The picture is different in Bradford, where targeted education and outreach, delivered in schools, clinics, and community centres, coincided with a drop in first cousin marriages from 39% in the early 2000s to 27% by 2019. This decline has already led to fewer cases of severe congenital disorders in the local Pakistani community. In Pakistan itself, however, there has been no comparable movement. The national rate of cousin marriage remains fixed at around 2/3, with little evidence of change despite rising education and urbanization. Religious voices have begun to respond. Imam Sadiq, preaching in the Gulf, reframes premarital screening as a health jihad, calling on Muslims to protect future generations by preventing harm. Progressive scholars invoke the Islamic principle of darar, no harm, to discourage high-risk unions, arguing that safeguarding children is a religious duty. These messages resonate where outside interventions often fail, suggesting that meaningful reform depends not just on policy, but on trusted cultural language and leadership. Today, first cousins still share 12.5% of their DNA, and each new union risks compounding hidden mutations. For every policy debated, another child shoulders the outcome. As governments hesitate, families pay the price. The silence persists, but the consequences can no longer remain invisible. Share your perspective below.